back to the channel and welcome back to spooky season, and I've decided to share with you today something horrifying, and that is my horrifying fantasy opinions. So these are 10 controversial opinions, 10 opinions that might not be so popular, 10 opinions that might make people unsubscribe to my channel. I have been getting many unsubscribers over the last 2 months. My channel isn't really growing. That's not because people are unsubscribing. People are just unsubscribing at quite a rate over the last few months, and this is going to fuel that even more. But I'm not too fussed because at the end of the day, the numbers aren't really that important to me. So I'm going to give you my horrifying fantasy opinions anyway, and we'll just see how it goes. The first one of those is, I'm just going to shoot straight for the stars straight away. Mistborn by Brandon Sanderson. Don't worry, I really like Mistborn, but I'm going to go out there and say that The Final Empire is the best book in the Mistborn trilogy of books. I do believe that the third book is fairly close in quality to the first book, but I'm going to go out and say that Mistborn peaked with The Final Empire. I really love the world building in this first novel. The introduction to the characters is almost flawless. Yes, you know, the sand launches of the second two books are really entertaining, but I think as far as quality goes, as far as trying to deliver on a premise, I think the first novel, it really peaks there, and it doesn't really get any better. And for my second opinion, I'm going to go with that the Witcher books are not only underrated, but the quality does not drop after the first two short story collections. So I've read 5 books in the Witcher series so far, and I can tell you that the quality of writing, the quality of character work, it does not dip in any meaningful way at all. I think the quality is just as high in the books that precede the two short story collections, and I think that the fact that more people aren't on this series on a regular basis makes it very underrated. I think that other than maybe the second half of Time of Content, it's an incredibly consistent series as far as quality goes. The writing, the humour, the characters, the world building, it's all really fantastic, and I think it deserves more of a look. Next up is my Malazan opinion. So, Malazan, Book of the Fallen. I'm only 5 books in, but what I will say is, everyone says this book, this series of books is very difficult to read. I don't think this is a hard series of books to read. I think you do have to be fairly familiar with fantasy or be experienced enough to be able to handle lots of different names of places and character names and stuff like that. That's where the real difficulty comes from. It's not that the prose is difficult to understand. It's not that the prose is particularly dense. At the end of the day, this, you know, we're not reading classic, you know, 1800s literature here. This is a case of there's just a lot. There's a lot of information, and I can understand why that, you know, makes some people struggle with the series. But do not be put off by everyone saying that this is a difficult series. It's a long series and there's a lot of information, but that is where the difficulty is. It's not in the density of the prose. You know, Stephen Erickson is very modern. You know, he'll bring you along with him. Trust him to tell you the information you need when you need it, and just you know, absorb the world through osmosis. You will find after a few books it comes quite naturally. Do not be put off by the difficulty of the Malazan series. Next up, maybe a little less controversial, but I think that Malice by John Gwynne is better than Valor by John Gwynne. I feel that Malice delivers such great slow burn character work, fantastic political intrigue, and amazing world building. There's nothing that Malice does that Valor really does any better. You could say there's more action, it's a little bit faster paced than Malice, but do those things really make it any better? I don't think so. I think Valor is a great book. I just think it is the weakest in the series, and I think Malice really, it does rub shoulders for me with Ruin and Wrath, which are probably the best 2 books in the series, but I don't think there's a discernible quality difference between those 3 books whatsoever. I think Malice is very underrated when it comes to John Gwynne's novels. And next, let's talk about some Robin Hobb. So I believe that every book in Live Ship Traders is better than every book in the Farseer trilogy. So that's controversial because of these 2 books. Now, I think it's a fairly strong consensus that Royal Assassin is one of the better of the realms of the Eldlings books, and the strongest book in the initial trilogy. And I'm not going to disagree with that. I think that's quite a fairly accurate statement from what I've read so far. But I think it's on par with The Mad Ship, which I think is the weakest of the 3 Live Ship Traders books. And I think books 1 and 3 in that series, they absolutely decimate anything that happens in the Farseer trilogy. The quality of the prose, the character work, the world building, the pacing, the editing, everything is just far better. It's far more succinct. I think it delivers on all of its premises much better than the Farseer trilogy, which is still a great trilogy. I'm not giving it a hard time. I just think Live Ship Traders was a massive step up by Robin Hobb. Next up, a very controversial series on Booktube, and I'm going to say that The Broken Empire is an underrated trilogy of books. It's a very underrated series by Mark Lawrence. I think The Broken Empire is looked down upon because I think a lot of people haven't necessarily finished the series. Book 1 is hard to take. It is very dark. It is nihilistic. The character is very hard to like, and we have to ride along with him. Honoris York Ancraft is quite a difficult character to get on with. The second book has a lot of time jumps. It is, it's kind of like the Pulp Fiction of fantasy novels. It is very much stitched together from different time periods, different times in York's life. And that continues into the third book. But I do believe that it is a trilogy that, in a lot of ways, similar to, say, something like Lord of the Rings, it can't really be taken as one volume at a time. If you're looking to kind of test the quality of this series, you do have to have finished it. That is mostly because so much is withheld from the reader, mostly from the character side, a little bit from the plot side as well. But it is one arc over 3 books that really doesn't work so well as a single book. You can read Prince of Thorns as a solo novel. I just don't think you will think it is quite that great. But all in all, the writing is really, really good in this series. It is very underrated. I think it deserves a shout out for sure. Next up, a very controversial opinion. I don't believe that any authors recently have quite come close to matching A Song of Ice and Fire by George R.R. Martin. And that is mostly from the sides of political intrigue and world building. So I think that authors have gotten very, very, very good dealing with characters. I think, the likes of Joe Abercrombie and Robin Hobb are delivering fantastic characters. Some characters better than George R.R. Martin was able to do, for sure. I think some authors are doing great things with their action, with their plotting, and you just got to look at John Gwynne for that. I mean, his plotting and his action are exceptional. The pacing is really, really good in his books. But what people are really struggling with, I think Stephen Erickson with Malazan has kind of hit the scope and world building, but there's always one element that falls down. I think the plotting, the character work, the world building, the scope, everything is dialed up to at least an 8 out of 10 in A Song of Ice and Fire. It's incredibly consistent in that way. Maybe it was kind of too consistent. Maybe it was too wide in scope and too well put together that it is actually now unfinishable. Some people would say that. But yeah, I think a lot of authors are struggling. I think there's a lot of fantasy fatigue on Booktube currently. People are going to try to find different things. Maybe they go to grimdark for that kind of aspect, or maybe they go over to a character-driven author to try and get those elements. But the holistic package that is A Song of Ice and Fire is very unobtainable for a lot of authors, and there is a real lack of authors that are able to capture everything that George managed to pull off with this. Let me know what series you think are able to hit every single point to the same level or better. I'm finding it difficult so far, but I've not read everything, so put it in the comments below. I'm just going to get more and more unsubscribers, because next I'm going to say that from the First Law series of books, that Logan Ninefingers is quite a weakly put together character. He stands out of those early characters for me personally as being quite underdeveloped. He is quite two-dimensional, which is not necessarily a bad thing. but I do believe until halfway through the second book, we don't really get any real payoff from Logan Ninefingers. He is quite stereotypical. He is a one-line merchant. That stuff is played off to quite an entertaining fashion in the third book, but I do believe the first half of this trilogy that Logan really doesn't offer much, and the supporting cast around him really deliver the quality. I think West and his sister RD, I just think Glocta obviously takes a lot of the plaudits, but even the likes of like Baez is probably more interesting a lot of the time. Dogman, there's so many great characters in this series. I just think Logan Ninefingers gets a lot of plaudits and a lot of praise, and he gets quoted a lot, and it's kind of unjustified for the first half of this trilogy for sure. Though he does it does come home in the second half of the trilogy, so I will give him that. Next up, the Wheel of Time is nothing like Lord of the Rings. This book especially, The Eye of the World, gets compared to The Fellowship of the Ring so much, and so many people say, why read Wheel of Time? It's just like a Lord of the Rings rip-off, or like a fan series of Lord of the Rings. It's literally nothing like Lord of the Rings. So I understand there is like a chosen one trope in this, but compare the two chosen one tropes. You have a halfling in Frodo Baggins, and you have Rand al'Thor, the Dragon Reborn. Not only are they not similar in this first book, they're completely polar opposites for the rest of the series. When you compare them together, they're literally humble beginnings is just about all you can really put together. They both came from a rural background, and they both have to try and help save the world. There's nothing else. The characters are completely different, and I just don't see the similarities there at all. You have a group of people that try to travel on a quest. I understand that. They don't travel together. They never travel together. In the whole series, they spend all of about a day together. They're almost always split up into smaller parties. The character makeup, the composition of the group, completely different. Where they travel to, why they travel to places, completely different. The world building, this is nothing like Middle Earth, nothing like Middle Earth at all. The politics, the descriptions, the cities, the towns, the geography is completely different. Nothing about this series really feels anything like Lord of the Rings. The magic systems, it's so different. There are so many more series that are closer to Lord of the Rings than The Wheel of Time. Next up, that if you're someone that really, really loves Lord of the Rings or Middle Earth, you read The Hobbit, the Great Tales, I think you owe it to yourself to read The Silmarillion. My hot take is that rereading in Middle Earth should begin with The Silmarillion. I think this enhances any reread of Lord of the Rings. I think it gives so much context to the world and the language especially, and more importantly the people, the cultural differences between the different races. Once you know their beginnings, their origin stories, from the creation of the world to all of the great deeds and the types of people, how the people interacted over hundreds of years, thousands of years even. I think that coming off of this text into The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings and Great Tales and stuff like that, this really gives you the basis to kind of glean more enjoyment out of that book, especially Lord of the Rings generally. And yeah, I would suggest, if you've read Lord of the Rings more than once, next time read The Silmarillion first and see how you go. So those are 10 horrifying fantasy opinions. I know I'm going to be alone in a lot of this. It's subjective because it's an opinion. It's just how I feel about things, really. At the end of the day, it doesn't kind of discredit your opinions any less. Hopefully you didn't unsubscribe from my channel like everyone else did. Hopefully you can, take it with a pinch of salt, because it's my opinion. Let me know your horrifying fantasy opinions, everything that you get told off for in the comment sections down below, and then we can kind of hang our heads in shame together.